Hello, everyone. I am so excited to be here today. My name is Isabel, and I create work under the name Icy Bitch. I'm an XR creator, and I focus on 3D characters and scenes, AR and VR experiences, and everything in between. My background is in design and advertising, but once I learned about XR and everything that came with it, I fell in love, and I haven't stopped since. Today is very exciting because I'm collaborating with Meta and Lenslist to teach you 3D modeling and optimization tips and tricks. We are going to go through the entire process of creating a unique character and then building a world filter off of it. Before we get into it, all of these tools are good for my workflow, but if you know a software that's good for you and can get the same job done, go for it. Just be comfortable and be creative. I'm going to be using Procreate, Photoshop, Illustrator, Blender, and Metaspark. A lot of the things that you make in Procreate can also be made in Photoshop or Illustrator, so it's totally up to you what software you use. This is just what works best for me. So here's a quick breakdown of what we're going to be doing. We're going to come up with an idea for a character and sketch it out. Then we're going to bring it into Blender and start 3D modeling it. We're going to optimize everything, and then we're going to import it into Spark along with other assets that we create to tie it all together in a world filter. And yes, this may sound very intimidating, but I created a guide for you that takes you along the entire 10-step process. And I'm also giving you all of the assets that I created to make this filter. Now here's the idea. Since this workshop is all about storytelling, I started brainstorming what character would symbolize all of the ideas that we as creators have throughout our journey. So I came up with this. Every single story starts from an idea. It comes to us like a glimmer of light flickering in the back of our imagination until we build on it, kind of like a firefly in the night sky. As creators, all we can do is build on those ideas flickering in the back of our mind, turning our imagination into a night sky filled with fireflies of ideas. The community of creators that Meta and Lenslist are creating brings us all together, allowing us to support, teach, and be passionate about one another's ideas. So I introduce to you a world filter of a garden of fireflies that symbolizes the boundless ideas and imagination and connections that us as creators have with each other and with the communities that we're a part of. So how are we going to do this? Let's get right into it. All of my best ideas, I started out by sketching it. So I am in Procreate and I just want to sketch out some ideas, some quick little things just to get my mind moving about this idea. All of the things that you're doing here, you can also do in Photoshop and in Illustrator, which is exactly what we're going to do in just a bit. I'm just using this as a way to sketch out some general shapes and ideas so then it's easier for me to go into Blender and do it. The first thing I'm going to start sketching out is the shape of the firefly. Click on the settings and I'm going to go on to drawing guide and edit drawing guide. And I'm just going to click symmetry right here and it comes up with a line so I'm able to draw on either side and it mirrors it. Click done and we're ready. So the shape of the Lensless logo is like this. Okay? I mean, it's much better than that, but this is just a quick sketch. Maybe I want to have the entire body of this firefly in the shape of the Lensless logo. So I'm drawing in the body and I'm thinking this is going to be yellow right here. This firefly is going to glow from here. And then maybe a head. And antennas. And I mean, I'm thinking this would be the firefly being closed with the wings like towards the body. So now I am going to draw another one. This is usually how I do it. I'm just drawing out some basic shapes and just getting a general idea of what I want to do. I'm looking at a picture of a firefly right now, and I want the body to be maybe a little bit more detailed. So I'm just going to be making some general shapes. And I think that I want the outer wings to come out to there. And maybe the inner wings like right there. And I'm going to transform this to be a little bit smaller, so then it could be the centerpiece of our filter, because even though I'm sketching out the character shape, I do also want to expand this project into a filter and, building out everything. You're going to end up needing to make other assets with it. So once we have the general shape of the firefly, even though it looks very rough, and as every project does in the beginning, it's totally normal and totally okay for everything to look rough in the beginning and up until just like a minute before the end. That's usually how my projects go. My idea for the filter is we're going to create a firefly specific to Lenslist. So it's going to embody all of the branding details, the colors, the vibe, and the symbolism of what Lenslist does. We have the firefly right here, and I want this to be like a pedestal that you can place in your space. I know I'm not using the exact tools, but this is just a sketch, so it doesn't matter. I'm thinking we're gonna have some fireflies all around, and we're also going to build arches that are kind of like windows. I want them to be like windows that you can see the outside, but with a different hue and color. We're gonna have like a title up here, and I'm thinking maybe some grass. Maybe we'll have little emblems at the top of the arches, maybe some flowers. And I'm sure that this idea is going to expand from here, but that's all we're going to do with the sketching. We're going to get right into Adobe Illustrator, so follow me there. Okay, so we're going to be making the general shape of the firefly using these two references and the Lenslist logo. I'm going to use the pen tool, and I'm going to start creating just the shape of the head. And what I like to do is I only like to create half of the shape that I want, and then duplicate it, right click, transform, and click reflect, hit OK. And now that's like a shape that I could start playing with. I'm gonna extrude it downwards and connect the shapes. Now that I have the general shape of the head, even though I could have made this in Blender, I'm gonna start moving in the corners and, playing around with it just a little bit to make it a little bit unique. So once I have that down, I'm gonna work on the body. Using the pen tool, still, I'm going to model out the way that body looks. And by no means does this need to be perfect. Everything is just totally up to you. Just have fun with it. This is not supposed to be too serious. You can always change whatever you want later on. Just have fun with it and get creative. Now you're going to take this object, duplicate it, right click, transform, reflect, and hit OK. So we have that general shape, and we're going to make it into one object, make it smaller. Okay, I'm going to add a stroke onto this, but we're going to take the stroke off as soon as we're about to export. I just want it to be easier to see. So now it has a stroke on it. I'm going to duplicate this object and send it to the back by right-clicking, arrange, send to back, or you can use the key commands. Make it a little bit larger, and then duplicate this again, selecting both of them, transform, and we're going to reflect the other way. And we're going to send it to the back. I'm using the key commands for that. And now we're starting to get the shape of something that looks somewhat like a body. And just going to keep selecting objects and extruding them. I'm going to take the shape of the head and maybe use it as the bottom. And I'm going to play around with this just for a little bit until I get the desired shape that I want. I ended up creating this shape for the firefly's body, and I have vectorized the Lenslist logo so then I can place it on top. So I'm going to select these and drag them on top. And even though it looks a little rough, we're going to go into Blender and we're going to clean this all up. So we have the body shape. I also created the wings underneath and the wings on top. And these are just the general shapes. We're going to be texturing them, extruding them in Blender, doing a bunch of cool stuff with them. So this is just the general shape, and we can get it done really, really fast like this. Before the next step, we need to export these shapes so then we can open them in Blender. What I like to do is I like creating a new file, just like that. And I like to select the object that I want to export, copy it, paste it into the new document. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger, and we're going to take off the stroke from the entire thing because we don't really need it. We just need the general shape of the body. So we're going to go File, Export, Export As, and then we're going to click on this drop-down menu, SVG, which stands for Scalable Vector Graphic, and in Blender we'll see the same exact file type there, so we can import it. We're going to name this file Firefly Body and export. Just click OK, and we're going to be doing the same thing for the shape of the wings. So we're going to be selecting them, copying them, opening the other file, pasting them in there. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. File, Export As, and then I'm going to label this as the wings, and it's the under part of the wings, and export. And just repeat the same process for all of the shapes that you want to include. So now we're going to head into Blender and we're going to work on it from there. So we are in Blender, and usually I just hit the letter A on my keyboard and I click the letter X and hit delete just so I can start off with a clean base. I'm going to click File, Import. On this panel, you should have Scalable Vector Graphics. It's .svg. So you're going to click on that and you're going to find the file that you exported. So once you're here, I'm going to click on the body and just click Import SVG, and immediately you can see that the entire shape is there. When you see these like flickering lights, that means that the planes are overlapping and you kind of don't want that, but it's totally okay for now. You just imported it, so it's totally fine. Every single shape that we created in Illustrator is now here. So here comes the fun part. Just import all of the files that you exported and then we'll get started. So again, File, Import, Scalable Vector Graphics, and then I'm going to import the under part of the wings. I'm going to move that so I don't get confused. And then I'm going to import the top part of the wings. So now that you have all these shapes in Blender, they still look the same as they did in Illustrator, so don't expect anything too different. We're going to get working on them right now, though. So I just moved these two to the side to make it easier for me to see, and we're going to get right into this. So if you see on this right-hand corner, you have your layers, basically, of all of these curves. And these curves are these are not meshes, so they're not a 3D object yet. We are going to have to select them and make them into a mesh before we start editing them and extruding them and doing what we want with them. As you can see in this top corner, it organized it based on each folder is the file that you imported. So it makes it a little easier to select them. And if you want to deselect, you just hold down Shift, and it's like a lot of other softwares. So now that I have all of these selected, I'm going to right click and I'm going to convert to, oh, here's an actual tip that it took me a while to learn this, but when I would right click, I wasn't able to click on any of these options. So I realized that I had to hold down the Shift button and select another part of the object. And then when you go into whatever you want to go into, it works. So we're going to right click and go under Convert to and Convert to Mesh. And so now the symbol changed on this corner. So that's how you know that it's a mesh, a 3D object. And these are curves, so they are not. I'm going to select this and I'm going to hit the Tab button on my keyboard. And if you can see all of these little dots, when you select them, you can only select dots, right? And I want to select the whole entire top section. So in the top corner over here, there's a different select modes. This is the points, so you can select the points of each. This is where you can select each line. And this is where you can select each face. And what I do is I'm just going to hit the letter A on my keyboard, and it's going to select everything in that selection. And then I'm going to hit the letter E. And what that allows me to do is extrude the shape. So you can extrude it on the X, Y, and Z axes if you hit the button on your keyboard. So I'm going to extrude this, and I'm going to click to select that. I'm going to click the letter S and scale it in a little bit just to give it an edge. And we're looking good so far. So we're going to get out of the tab. So we'll just hit tab again. And what I want to do is offset each one of these layers and make them look like they're layered one on top of each other. Here's another quick tip. If you can't see like the move tool or any of the rotation tools, if they're not selecting to the center of the object and you want it to, just select the objects that you want it to snap to the center of. You're going to right click and you're going to set the origin to the center of the mass. So you're going to set the origin to the center of the volume, and when you click out of it, each one it understands to snap to the center. Each one of these little shapes, I'm going to move in and out, whatever I want, just to start defining the shape of this firefly. So each one is going to move and kind of be overlaid one on top of the other, but you can see the three-dimensional effect of it. And now we're going to be doing the same exact thing to this Lenslist logo. So just quickly, like a recap of what we did there, we're going to select it. We're going to right click, convert to mesh, and then we're going to set the origin to the center just to make it easier for us. We're going to select them again and hit the tab button, and then hit the A on your keyboard and E for extrude, and we're going to extrude it up a little bit. And so now we have a three-dimensional logo. So I'm going to take these and select them again and move them on top of wherever I want it to be on the firefly. And so now the shape is starting to come together. And as for the wings I want to curve them a little bit and just morph them to the shape of this. Once we do that, we're going to place them on top of the body and start texturing it and figuring out what exactly we want this to look like in the world filter. So I'm going to do this one quickly. I'm going to select these. I'm going to convert them to a mesh. I'm going to set the origin to the center of the volume. I'm going to select one of the wings, and I'm actually going to delete the other one, so then both of the wings are exact. I'm going to do the same to the other one. I'm going to select this and go onto the sculpting tab. And I'm going to click on the elastic deform tool and right click wherever on the screen. And then I'm going to change the radius to whatever I like and the strength. I want the strength to be all the way up and the radius to be pretty large, just so I can grab onto this corner and make it bent a little bit like the wings would be. So I'm going to turn it to the side and just move it a little bit just so I can get the shape that I want. And I'm going to do the same thing to this. So I'm going to go back to the object mode and select this wing now, and then go back and hit sculpt. And I'm going to just extrude it a little bit, making it a little bit bent so that it fits around the shape of the firefly. even though it doesn't look like we did too much, we're going to start putting this together and texturing it to see how the lighting is going to work on it and what else we're going to add to this filter to make it perfect. I'm going to go back to the layout tool and I'm going to select this, and you see all of these triangles on there. I'm going to try something. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. It just depends on how many subdivisions you have in this object. But I'm going to right click and click Shade Smooth. And you see it totally smoothed that out. It does take a little bit of computing power, but it's okay. It's honestly worth it. And I'm going to do the same thing to the other side too, just so you can't see those rough triangular lines. I'm going to take this and move it on top, and what I'm actually going to do is there's a tool called the cursor. Before, we were changing the origin to the center, and this cursor actually allows us to change where we want it to be like moved. So I'm going to place the cursor at the top because I want the wings to be able to move like naturally, like the way that a firefly's wings would move from the top. So I'm going to select where I want it to be, right click, and set the origin to the cursor. And so now when you click on this move tool, it moves it from the top. And this is going to be helpful when we use the rotate tool and when we keyframe what we want it to do. It also makes it much easier in Spark when you want to procedurally animate the way that you want the wings to move. So now that we have that, I'm just going to simply click Shift and the letter D and hit the X so then it goes on the X axis. I'm gonna just click to make it go into this position, right click and mirror on the X axis. So it just mirrored it. And now we can place it anywhere we want on the firefly. So I'm just going to select those two, and now that they're parallel, it'll be easier to move them wherever we want them to be. So I'm going to do the same thing to the other wings. I'm going to bring them over. I'm going to change the origin of it. So hit the cursor, put it on the top, right click, set the origin to the 3D cursor, and now I can move it from that direction. After some playing around with the shapes of the wings, I was able to get the shape that I kind of wanted. And now we're going to go on to texturing. So everything is going to start coming to life and it's going to be really, really awesome. Up at the top corner, there are different settings for the different shadings that you can see or view your 3D model at. So there is something called a wireframe, and you can see the wireframe of the entire object here. And over here is the regular shading. It doesn't use too much processing power on your computer. So these two are really safe and really just fast and easy to work in. Now we're going to get to texturing. So there's two different kinds of settings that we can use. In this corner, this is where the render properties are. So you can choose your render engine, and Blender has two render engines. I don't ever use Workbench. I use Eevee or Cycles. And a quick tip for anyone texturing for Spark or for anything AR, I would texture with the render engine Eevee. We're going to go into the shading tab. We're going to get into the texturing of this object. Also going to have to open up Photoshop. What I like to do is I like to add images and overlay them on top of the 3D model in each one of the sides. We're going to make a 1024 by 1024 page. We're going to go back into Blender and we're going to go onto the shading tab. And when we click on a portion of this, it may look a little alarming, and there's a tab right here. This is going to be where your nodes are. Nodes are kind of like a spider web of textures that you connect, and there's also some nodes and patches inside of Spark. So this is something that is going to be shown throughout multiple different softwares, maybe in a little bit of different ways. But in this corner right here, under the material properties, we're going to click use nodes, and it's going to change the color of all of the ones that weren't using nodes. Now, if you see this number 12 over here, you can see that there are 12 objects linked to this texture. And this texture we can change to be dark or light or whatever you want it to be. We're going to be texturing this and playing around with different kinds of images to overlay on top of this to get the desired look that we want. I love to use DALL-E as a source for my textures. So I'm going to generate a texture that would help me overlay it on top of the 3D object. First thing that I want to start with is actually the wings. The wings right now are just a regular white color, but if we overlay an image of wings on top of it, we can get a really cool transparent wing effect. These two are linked. I'm going to label this texture wing texture, and we're going to go into DALL-E. So I'm going to generate a wing texture that looks realistic that I can overlay on top of it. We have a wing right here. I'm going to export this out. We have to be very mindful of file sizes when we're working with this kind of stuff, and especially when we're attaching images on top of 3D objects. So we're going to try to make everything as small as possible without really compromising the way that it actually looks. So we're going to go File, Export As, and I'm going to just export it like this. And I'm going to name the texture. So I'm just going to name it Wing. And what I like to do, and here is another tip, I like to go on a website called tinypng.com and make the file size smaller to make it easier for me to work with. Okay, here we are. I'm going to drag in the texture that I exported, and it's going to just compress it for me, and it went down to this, and honestly I think this is good enough. Download it, and then I'm going to go back into Blender. You have to keep in mind that the file size of the entire object is going to include the file size of the images. That may be a common sense for some people, but it wasn't for me when I first got into this, so I figured I would mention it to you. So I'm going to drag in this wing into this texture right here. Right next to this color, there's a yellow dot. I'm going to connect that to the base color, and it wrapped it really nicely. But if I wanted to alter the way that it was mapping to it, which it does happen often where the images aren't wrapping properly, you can click on the object, okay? And then you're going to go into the UV editing. It's going to bring you to this edit mode, so it's immediately going to be in the tab mode. And then you're going to click A to select the entire thing. And even though you can see this panel right here, you can see that the texture is selected. You can click on the UV and project from view, and you see it's projecting exactly how I see it. And then right in this panel, you can click A and then S, expand it, turn it, and do whatever you want to it just to map it properly to what you want it to be mapped to. So I'm going to move this texture right there, and then I'm going to go back into the shading tab, and you can see that the texture altered. And you can kind of notice that because I left a little bit of the white in there, and you can just go back and select it again by clicking A and moving this tool right here. It's coming along, and now I want to work on these top textures. I'm going to go into Photoshop, and I'm going to play around with some images and colors, and I'm hitting the brush tool, and I'm going to make sure it's really smooth. I'm going to start making some gradients, just some random gradients that I want. I'm going to generate another texture for the top of the wings. And I really like the way the center looks, and I like this texture right here, and we're just going to make this useful to us. And I know it looks super rough, but honestly, I want you guys to see how the process is just you having fun and being creative with the techniques. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to overlay this texture. I think I like this better. We're going to go File, Export As, and choose a file type and just go for it. And now we're going to go into Blender. We are going to drag in that texture that we exported and drag the color into the base color. And again, on this one, it mapped really well, but even if it didn't, we can UV map it, like unwrap it, by just going onto the UV editing, selecting with the A tool, and then going on to UV, project from view, select with the A, S, rotate it, and move it to the desired position. So as I'm working, I always like to see my process and see how far I've come from my original idea. So I like to select what I'm doing and I like to duplicate it and move it off to the side. And as I work on this, the shape is starting to develop into a little bit more of a defined shape. And I started to work on more texturing and I darkened the colors, and that's basically all I did. I just moved around the UV editing. And this is what I came up with. I want to make a back plate with the shape of this logo. So we're going to duplicate it, extrude it, and then hit tab. Now, what I like to do is if there's like a line of objects that I want to select, I hold down the Alt button and I select one of the points on the horizontal lines. And it selected the entire inside, which is very helpful because I'm just going to scale it all down until it's really small. And then I'm going to move it to the back of this so that when we create our world filter, this could be the centerpiece. I want this firefly to really be like extra detailed and glowing, and I just want to get the textures right on it. So I'm going to go into Photoshop, and from the textures that we worked on before, I'm going to go and generate a texture that would be like a, I would say, white metallic rough texture that would be on like a plaque of sorts. So I'm going to go on to Dolly and I'm going to type in white metallic marble texture seamless. Shade in the sides as if it's like shaded on a piece of metal. I'm going to go bring that back into Blender and drag it onto the plate. Go into the shading tab and I want to drag in that other texture. So once I have that texture in there, I'm going to connect the base color. The texture, I don't like the way that it's wrapping around this object, but we know what to do. We're going to click on it and click on the UV editing. Then you can UV project from view. Now it is perfect. I'm going to select this and copy it so that I can bring it into a new file that we can just export from. So I'm going to hit the letter A, X to delete, and then paste in the object over here. And we're going to change the shading so then we can see it just at this top corner. Select this and hold Shift and click the back plate. And then I'm going to set the origin to the center and move this towards the center. And I'm going to parent all of this to the back. So since all of this is selected and I held Shift and I clicked on the back plate, it's highlighted it like a brighter orange. So if you right click and you click parent, then that means that all of those objects that are darker orange are going to be grouped in with that other object. So if I move this, then everything moves with it. So I'm going to set that position to 0, 0, 0 on the X, Y, and Z. And now it's looking great. I want to check all of the polygons on this object, and I also want to optimize the file size of this just to make sure that we don't have any unnecessary weight in our file. There's this double circle icon, and I'm going to click this arrow right here, and I'm going to click this button called statistics, and that turns on these numbers right here. And what this tells me is how many objects, vertices, edges, faces, and triangles are in this entire scene. And that's why we made a different document, because we don't want to include all of the other shapes and all of the things that was our process, but we also don't want to delete our process. So making a whole new file with just the continuation of your object is just the way to go. So I'm going to select this. Each one of these objects can be made smaller to a certain degree depending on how high poly they are, and it gets more and more complex as the object gets more detailed. But what I like to do is I like to go into each of these objects and click this wrench, and then I like to click on this decimate modifier, and what that tells me is how many faces are on this one object. There's 45 faces, so to me that is totally fine. But sometimes you can go onto this ratio under this collapse section and you can type in the value 0.5 And you see how that changed the shape just a little bit, but it didn't really affect too much. That's what we like. We like when we can make objects a lot smaller without affecting the overall look of the object. So I'm going to go throughout every single one and I'm going to do this same exact thing. I'm going to show you one more time. I'm going to go onto the modifier, click on this wrench, and then I'm going to click decimate and go onto 0.5 on the ratio, and it made the face count go to 23, and that one is good. So then you move on to the next one and the next one and the next one. So now I think that our object is ready for Spark. What I want to do is select everything in the scene and go File, Export as a GLB. And I'm going to export this file as a GLB, and I'm going to include the selected objects. I don't think you need to select that necessarily. I've done it multiple times without selecting that, and it worked perfectly fine. It basically works like whatever you check over here is exactly what it's going to export. If you don't check anything, then it's going to export everything. Just to be sure, I like to select that, and then I'm going to name my file, and then we're going to head over to Spark. So now that we have opened Spark, we're going to be making a larger world filter. As I mentioned before, I want this to be like a garden with a pedestal and the firefly in the main center of the filter. And I also want fireflies to be flying around the user. So this is going to be a filter with larger sized items, not necessarily in polygons, but just I want the actual objects to be large. Since I want to make like a full environment when working with this filter, we're definitely going to be utilizing Spark's multi-plane tracking capabilities to make this happen. I'm going to go into the tracked world object template for patches, and I'm going to click on it. And now that the scene is open, I'm going to expand this window and go on view. I want to see the patch editor, so I'm going to click hide patch editor. It doesn't actually mean hide the patch editor. It doesn't have a check next to it. So when you click it, it opens the patch editor. And when you go back to it, it hides it again. And this looks a little bit intimidating. I'm still intimidated by this, but it's totally okay. We're going to get through this together. This kind of reminds me of the node system in Blender when we were texturing. So everything starts from a screen tab. Once the filter is opened, the user can move around their phone and the phone understands their environment. Once the phone understands the environment, the user is able to tap the screen and spawn the 3D object that you created in the scene. I don't want the users to be able to scale the object up and down. I want to set that scale of the object so that it actually looks like an environment and a world filter set so that, they could just place it in their space and walk around instead of, pinching it to move it around and all of that. So we're going to go into a bit of scripting and patch editor work, and it's really nice to start with a base like this because it's already kind of built for you and we just need to customize it. Since I mentioned that I don't want the user to be able to scale this object, I want to set the scale myself. If you go down here, you will see this scale box, and this is controlling the scale of the object. And right here, there's a debug option. And when you click on and off, you can see that this object pops up. So I'm going to keep this checked on right here so I can see the object. And then I'm going to go right back down to this scale box. And I'm going to select the animation and transition patches, and I'm just going to delete them. Now that we deleted them, that was the thing that was controlling the scale. So we're going to customize even more, but that's the first step. Delete those two. Now it's time for us to drag in our 3D object. So from Blender, I exported a GLB of the Firefly into a folder. I'm going to take that file and drag it into Spark in this assets panel. I'm going to be giving you all of these files, so you will have everything that you need to replicate this. Now that the Firefly 3D object is in here, you can see that all of the textures have been baked into it. And that's why I like using the GLB file format. I'm going to take this cube that's labeled Firefly for Spark, and I'm going to drag it into the drag here. And now you can see that this just spawned in our space. I'm going to delete the clock so then it's easier for us to manage everything. So I want this object to spawn in the center of the screen. So in order to do that, I'm going to drag this device right here into the patches. And you can see that it comes up with this purple patch right here. And now I'm going to search for the divide patch and add it right here. And then right here on this bottom corner, I'm going to change this number from 1 to 2. It basically takes the screen resolution and splits it in half so that the object spawns in the center. And then I'm going to connect them to the screen position. So I'm going to drag the second option right here, and then I'm going to drag this output into the screen position. Next thing that I'm going to do is I want to make this object always come up in the same position on the screen. I'm going to look for a loop patch. And this duration says 1. So once I connect it, that means that it's going to spawn every 1 second. So in order to make it spawn consistently, I'm going to type in the value 0.01. And then I'm going to connect it. So I'm going to take this second looped arrow right here, and I'm going to drag it into the hit test under start. And now this is continuously pulsing with this loop animation. So after this, we're going to take the screen tap. Now I'm going to add a patch called switch to switch on that looping animation and allow the object to slide side to side as we're trying to place it. So I'm going to look for the switch patch. And I also want to add a not patch because when I want the user to tap, I want the sliding to stop. So we want to reverse that switch after the screen tap it has been done. So then we're going to connect them. So when you test out this filter on your phone, the Firefly is going to slide across the screen until you tap, and then it's going to lock into place. Now we're going to make a sender, and we're going to rename it to placed, so then once the screen is tapped, then the object is placed. So I'm going to add the patch, and I'm going to double click on the name. I'm going to rename it to placed, and then I'm going to connect it. After we make that patch, we're going to go up into the render pipeline. And you can see right here, there's a patch called drag here, and everything that you dragged into the scene is kind of popping up right here. So I'm going to just make some room for myself. And I watched this on a video that was super helpful, and I really wanted to include this into this video because I think that it's really helpful for any other filter that you're building. So this may look a little bit complicated, but I also learned this from a video, so I'm just going to try to explain it the best that I can. What I want in this filter is before the user places the object in their space, I want it to have a little bit of transparency. And then when it's fully placed, I want it to switch to fully opaque. So it's going to blend it in between. So I'm going to show you the patches that I use to do that. I'm going to use a mix patch. And I'm going to drag this shader render pass right here into the second arrow. And then I'm going to drag this one into right here. Basically what this means is that when the alpha is 0, it's fully opaque. Now I want to change the transparency when object is tapped into place. It's going to have a little bit of transparency to it. So I'm going to add a receiver patch. And when I click on this down arrow, I'm going to click on placed. And then I'm going to add another patch called if then else. And how I learned about this is that basically once this object is placed, then I want it to be 100% opaque, 0. And if it is not placed, so any other time that it's not placed, so like when it's just moving around on the plane and the user didn't tap it to place it yet, I want it to have transparency of about 0.7. So it's going to be like 70% translucency. Take this and I'm going to drag it into the alpha. So basically, once it's placed, it's going to be at 100%. You're not going to see any transparency. And then if it's not placed, it's going to be 70%. And the last thing that I need to do to solidify all of this, and I just need to make a little bit more space for myself, I'm going to add a shader render pass to kind of solidify all of this together. So I'm going to drag this mix into the shader, and I'm going to drag this arrow into the background. So now we're ready to build the rest of this filter. I'm going to go onto the AR library, and I'm going to search for stairs. So I'm going to type that in, and I'm going to look through a couple of them, and when you see that the vertices are large, I usually just skip over those, and I think I like these. So you can tell a huge difference between the vertices and the geometry. So I'm going to click import, and now you can see it right here in your assets panel. So I'm going to drag this box into the drag here, and I'm going to start moving it around the space. And I want the stairs to be going up to the Firefly, so like it's on a pedestal. And throughout this entire process, I am going back and forth from my phone, testing this out, just to see if everything looks cool. So we've got this going, and I really like how the grays are matching the gray of the metal. So I'm going to keep this the way it is. And then I'm going to look for some grass. So I'm going to go back into the library, and I'm going to type in grass. So as I look through, I'm trying to keep in mind the file size, but since our file size is very low right now, I can kind of get away with adding some extras in there. So I'm just looking through this grass just to see which one that I like best, and that will work with my scene the best. So I actually really like the way that this looks. I'm going to import it. So I'm going to go onto the assets panel and drag that right here. And it comes up pretty huge, but it's okay. We're just going to scale it down and we're going to place it in the areas that we want. I'm going to keep duplicating them and adding them all around just so I can fill up this space. So I'm selecting it and then I'm going to right click and duplicate it and I'm going to move them. And then I'm going to keep doing that until I'm happy with it. So now that I've added all of the grass that I want, I'm still going to be moving everything around. And this is the really, really fun part where everything just kind of comes together. Basically, I'm going to be going through a couple of programs, going back and forth, Photoshop, Procreate, whatever I can to add more to this. So just be aware, you're going to be opening a bunch of softwares. I want to add a jar of fireflies at the corner of each of the steps. So I'm going to go into Procreate and quickly make a frame by frame animation of lights flickering. I created a GIF with all of these little dots. And as I move through the file, you can see that all of the lights kind of flicker around. So you can get this done in any kind of software that you want. But I used Procreate because I like working with my hands. Once we have these kinds of images where the lights are kind of flickering, and we're going to repeat this process in different ways, we're going to import that as an animation sequence and apply it to a plane that we're going to put inside of the jar. So I'll show you exactly what I mean. First, we need a jar, and we're going to search the AR library for it. We're going to type in glass jar. Once I find one, I'm going to import it into the scene. I found a jar that I like, and I'm going to scale it down to fit into the scene. Now that I have that placed, I'm actually going to open up the asset summary just so I can keep an eye on how big this file is going to be. So then if I need to make anything smaller or optimize any textures, it's good to have that open. Okay, so now we're going to import that texture animation. So we're going to choose these files that we want and open them. And I'm going to click on frame reduction. I'm also going to reduce the textures, and I'm just going to play around with these settings until I like it. So you can see that the original size was 2.92 megabytes and the current size is now 624 kilobytes. So it's perfect. I'm going to import that and you're going to see it right here. And now we're going to make a texture and connect that texture animation to it. So then we're going to go and add a plane in the scene, and we're going to make the material that animation. So you can see right here that now this is a animation on a material. I'm going to move that into the jar. Now that I have that jar placed with the animation inside of it as a plane, I want to slow down that animation a little bit because it's going a little too fast for me. So I'm going to change the frames per second to 5. And I'm going to keep it on loop. And then I'm going to select them and duplicate it. And now I'm going to move them over to the other corner. And I see that some of the grass is overlapping with the stairs, so I'm just going to move it a little bit. And we're looking good. I might duplicate this again, but I'm just going to move on to the rest of the filter right now. So I want to add arches right around here. So I'm going to go into the assets library again, and I'm going to look for some arches that would look good in this scene. So I'm going to just check which one I like the best. And I think I like this one a lot. So now I'm going to go into the assets panel and drag the arch into the filter. I'm also going to move these lights lower. Okay, so now this arch is here. I'm going to position it properly and scale it down. And as I said in the beginning of this, everything is kind of just going to change and morph into its own idea. So we can just have fun with it. So I know that in my original drawing I had 2 arches, but we don't have to be too picky with it. I'm just going to move everything around and scale it to my liking. And this is coming along. So I'm going to add some flowers and I'm going to add some gems to the scene and fill up this space. And I want them to be low poly flowers, so I don't want them to be too much. I love this rose, so I'm going to import that. And then I'm going to drag it into the scene. So I'm just going to be adding these roses wherever I want. So I'm going to repeat that on the other side, and I'm going to import a couple more flowers to build out the scene. So after some playing around, I added some extra flowers and gems in the scene, and I'm going into the asset summary, and I have a feeling that my file size may be too large. So in my asset summary, I am taking a look, and this is 5.2 megabytes, and we have to keep it under 4. So 4 and under is a good number. I have to go into the textures and find which ones are the heaviest files so that I can alter them and optimize them so then they can be much smaller and work with the filter. So right here, I see that this gem texture is 597 kilobytes. So I'm going to open Photoshop, and I'm going to create a 1024 by 1024 file, and I'm going to drag that texture into here. I also wanted to alter the colors, so this kind of works out. And I think I like that color. I'm going to click File, Export, Export As, and I want this to stay very, very small. So I'm going to export this into the textures. So I dragged the image into here and let it load a couple of times. I was able to get it down to 172 kilobytes. So now I'm going to go back into Spark and replace it with the smaller file. And now you can immediately see that it went from 600 to 167. So now I went into every single one of these textures, and I looked at the file sizes, and I repeated that entire process, and I brought it down from those 5 megabytes down to 2.9 megabytes just from the textures. So I'm going to go in and add some animations to some of these objects in the scene. So I'm going to click on one of the gems, and I'm going to go to this top corner, top right corner, and I'm going to go to animate, and I want them to spin. And you can see that in the patches it comes up with a patch for this animation, and it's spinning on the wrong axis, so I'm just going to alter this. So once we added the animation, I'm going to change the duration to 10 just so it can slow down a little bit. So I repeated the steps on the other gem, and I changed this to -360 so that it would turn the opposite way. Now it's time to add a particle system and emitter so that there are fireflies flying all around this entire filter. I created another short frame-by-frame animation of 7 frames, and I'm going to go through them. It's just the light getting dimmer and then brighter. So then I can add that to an animation sequence, put that on top of a plane, and make it look like objects are glowing in the scene. So I'm going to make a texture animation and choose the files. To select these files that I want in the animation, I'm going to hit open, and then I'm going to reduce the texture size, and then I'm also going to use the frame reduction option as well. And I'm going to import it, and I'm going to change the speed immediately of it just because I don't really like the speed of it. I'm going to change that to 5 frames per second. So now I'm going to make a material of that animation so then we can apply it onto the emitter. So I'm going to select light animation sequence, and I'm going to name this texture to be flashing lights. And then in my scene under drag here, I'm going to add a particle system, and then we're going to attach the flashing lights material onto it. So now we see that this is a regular emitter, and I'm going to show you the settings that you can use to make this cover the entire scene. So I'm going to click on this emitter, and I'm going to change the type to ring, and then I'm going to change the radius right here to 0.1, and this is just from testing things out. And then I'm going to change the next number to 7, change the birth rate to 30, the spray angle is going to be 50, and right here we're going to write the number 10, and the speed is going to be 0.01. And now we can see that the filter is going all around. The lights are kind of flashing like fireflies, so it's perfect. It's absolutely perfect. You can move it up or down to make the fireflies go higher up, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. So now we have fireflies flying all around. We have the jars of fireflies. We have our character of a firefly. We animated the objects in the scene. We built the entire scene. And now it's time to just go on the asset summary and check how we're doing. We have some more space, so I think we could add just a little bit more details to push this further. I want to make the bottom of this firefly glow, and I'm going to use the same animation that I used on the emitter, and I'm going to put it on a plane and overlay it on top of this so it looks like there's a glowing animation on top of it. I'm going to add a plane to the scene, and I'm going to change the material to the flashing lights. So we can see right here that the plane came up along with the flashing light animation. We're going to make that larger, and you can see that we can overlay it on top of this to kind of give it an effect that it's glowing. I want to further push the texture of that glow on the bottom, and I changed the texture of the bottom of the firefly to add, and I'm going to also make the colors more vibrant, and I think that it's starting to look like it's glowing. I'm going to test this out on my phone, and I will be right back to see if there are any more things that I need to change or add. So I want to work with reactive lighting. I want this filter to be lit differently every single time someone else opens it. So if you're in a dark room, I want this to react and get brighter because you're going to need to see it in a dark room. And same thing goes with a lighter room. I want it to just match the lighting of the room that it's in. So we're going to do that by scripting it. So I'm going to click this plus sign in the bottom, and I'm going to go on the scripting tab and click JavaScript. And then it's going to come up right here, and I'm going to double click on it and go into Visual Studio Code. Again, like many things, this could be very intimidating, and honestly, it still intimidates me when I go into this, but they set up this script so perfectly, and it basically tells us everything we need to know in order to do it. So it comes with some links that are helpful to us. All of the lines of code that are colorful are the lines of script that are actually being in use. My favorite thing to do is go onto the scripting documentation that Spark has available. So we are on the Metaspark documentation, and I'm going to click on the scripting API, and I'm going to go on the light estimation module. And the best part about this is that they give us an example of what we can use and basically the code, and we can copy it, and we're allowed to use it in our work. So I'm just going to copy it, or you can click this. I should have just clicked that button. And then I'm going to go back into Visual Studio Code, and I'm going to select everything, and I'm just going to paste everything just right on top of it. And then I'm going to click Control Save. So it's going to save that. And then we're going to go back into our scripting, and you can kind of see that the lighting has changed in the scene. And what this basically says is that it's going to take the lighting from the scene, it's going to like estimate it and understand what the lighting is, and it's going to use ambient light in your filter to fill in the gaps. And once I come back into Spark, you can already see that everything is different, but you can also see that right here, the intensity on the ambient light is grayed out, which means that it's being controlled by the JavaScript. And that means that it's working, and it is perfect. Okay, so it is all working beautifully. I have some more space in this file, so before I go, I'm going to just add a couple more 3D objects, and I will be right back just to show you the final product. I'm going to be using the library and just searching for maybe pebbles and just extra things I can use to fill up this space, because I always like to use all of the file space that they give me with all my filters. So we are just about done with this filter. I finished adding extra grass and extra plants. The best part about Spark is that if you have a 3D object somewhere, you can duplicate it without expanding your file size. So we're just going to go on to the asset summary one last time just to double check, and I think we're good enough to publish. So all you have to do now is click the Publish tab, wait for everything to load, and then upload it. And then once this is uploaded, you can just name it and add a video to it and click publish. Thank you so much for watching this video. It means the absolute world to me that I get to share my passion with you guys. I can't wait to hear all of your questions, and I can't wait to see what you guys make. Stay tuned for our Q&A sessions so we can answer some of your questions, and I will talk to you all soon.